All right, today I'm getting ready to do Tartine's Country Loaf. It's their basic bread recipe for sourdough. It's very versatile, so you can change it up in a lot of different ways by adding different things, or you can even use it for pizza dough, or a lot of times I use it for focaccia also. So this is the book that I am baking from. I started during quarantine. I saw a series of videos by Tartine's Head of Bread on Instagram, and I watched them and it looked really easy. So I ordered the book, and there's a lot of technical information in the book, which I found to be very helpful. I would recommend reading it. But for today, we're just gonna walk through the steps of the basic country loaf, which is, the recipe is on page 48. You can see it there. Okay, so everything at Tartine does, all these recipes are done by weight, which I think is a good way to bake because you don't run into variations in how compact your flour is and things like that. So that's how I always do it. So I have my KitchenAid bowl. I like the shape of it for mixing different doughs. I use it for actually mixing a lot of different things in it. So I'm gonna tare my scale here. And then I'm going to do the water is about 80 degrees today. It's pretty warm in my kitchen. During the winter, my house is usually around 60 to 65 degrees, so it's pretty cold. So I would start with like a 90-degree water. This is a metal bowl, so it'll change temperature quickly. So it will cool the water once you pour it in. Since I'm adding it in first, I will start with a warmer water. So then by the time I add the sourdough in, it's around 80 degrees. So you're gonna do 700 grams for right now. Later in the recipe, in the process, you'll add another 50 grams of water, but for now it's just 700 grams, which I'm actually gonna need more water. Okay, 700 grams. Now I'm going to tare it again. And this is my sourdough starter. I fed it this morning, probably around 6:30 or 7. And right now it's 2. So it's been a while today. It'll vary the time that it takes your sourdough to get to the top depending on the temperature. But it's really, really bubbly. You can see along the sides there, you can see all the nice bubbles. You'll know when your starter is ready to bake with when it floats. It has to pass the float test. So I'm gonna do, it's 200 grams of sourdough starter. So I normally just start by plopping just a little bit in there. Make sure it floats, which it does. So now I'll just measure out 200 grams. Okay. Set that aside to feed later. I'll just rinse my hands in the water. Kitchen towel. All right, now the flour. We're gonna do, it's 900 grams of bread flour, and then it's 100 grams of whole wheat flour. I start with whole wheat, so 100 grams. That way, whole wheat weighs a little bit more. So I start with the whole wheat. That way, if I go a little bit over, I can correct it in the measurement of the bread flour. So that's right at 100 grams. And then I've got bread flour. And I'm using Central Milling, their whole wheat flour, and then they have a lot of different kinds of bread flours, but I'm using their Baker's Craft Plus. I tried a bunch of different kinds of their bread flour, and I like this one the best. It got a good rise, it stays moist, it's nice and chewy, so that's what I like, but you try as many different kinds as you want to. Find what you like. I'm just measuring this to 1,000. I didn't tear or clear out my scale after I added the whole wheat. I just went ahead and started adding the bread flour. So I'm looking for 1,000 grams. A little bit over. Okay. So now all you have in your bowl is water, sourdough starter, and flour. And make sure you're not wearing rings because it is messy. And you just start mixing it in. At first, really, it's just kind of moving it around in the bowl, and then after a while, you start like squeezing it. I don't know if you can see that, but you like squeeze it between your fingers and just keep moving it around. Make sure you're getting everything from the bottom and the sides. So this is mixing exactly to the recipe, but I have noticed sometimes you mix it and it feels fine, and then other times you'll mix it and it just feels a little bit dry. So once you do the recipe several times, you'll kind of get a feeling for it, and you might need to add just a little bit of water to it to get it to the right consistency. Like today it does feel a little bit dry. It's been windy today. It's warm. Just a splash more. You're just making sure that there's no dry clumps left, because this stage, after we're done mixing it, we're going to let it sit, and it just hydrates all of the flour. So you just want to make sure everything is nice and combined. Okay. Oop, piece escaped. All right. So now I'm going to use, this is called a dough scraper. I have several different ones that, for whatever reason, I've bought different types of baskets, and they all tend to send one of these. So some of them are really soft. I use those for actually scraping the bowls. Others are stiffer. So I'm going to use the stiff one to get all this dough off of my hands. So you're just kind of cleaning off your hands, getting the dough back in the bowl where it belongs. It's a messy thing, but I really do like using my hands because you can get a feel for what you're working with, as opposed to just using like a spoon or I know they have those special dough whisks, but I don't mind getting a little dirty. All right, so now that just sits for 20 to 30 minutes, and it allows all of that water to get soaked into the dough, into the flour. And then we'll come back and add the last 50 grams of water, and we're gonna add our salt. Okay, I forgot that I wanted to feed my starter, so I'll show you how I do that. So I like to use these Weck tulip jars. I've used the Weck, the straight-sided jars. I've used little crocks that I've gotten from different places. I've used a mason jar, and this little Weck jar with it comes with a couple different lids. It comes with a plastic lid that like you can really seal it off. It comes with a glass lid, and then it comes with this cork lid. I like using the cork lid. So what I'm gonna do is there's actually still quite a bit of starter in here. So let me grab a bowl. I'll just save it. I do things with, this is called discard. When you discard it to feed your starter. So there's quite a bit in here. You're supposed to have about 30 grams of starter when you feed it. I don't really measure it anymore, mostly because I don't put my starter into a clean jar every time. So it's really hard to tell exactly how much starter is left in there, but it's about that much. So this I'll save because I do different recipes with the discard. So now I need 120, 125 grams of water. For this, it doesn't have to be warm. It can just be room temperature, unless you're trying to get your starter to get to baking, being able to bake with it faster. Then I guess you could add warm water, but I'm just doing room temperature water. So 120 to 125, which is right about there. And then I'm gonna give it a little stir. This is my favorite spatula for stirring my starter. It's an OXO. I think it's called a jar scraper is what it is. All right, so now I'm gonna do all-purpose flour. I use Central Milling all-purpose flour. It's called their beehive flour is what they call it. Zero out my scale, and now I'm gonna do 140 grams of all-purpose flour. Okay. So now, just gonna mix it, scraping down the sides. Try to keep your jar as clean as you can. All right, so now that's ready to go. If I'm consistently baking, I'll go ahead and leave it on the counter. If not, if you didn't want to bake for the rest of the week, say, or for a few days and you didn't want to keep feeding it, you could scrape this all down. It's nice and fed, and then you can put it in the fridge. So there's this lid, and then this is the plastic lid that just fits on like a Tupperware would. And then there's a glass lid also, but I like this one. So I'm gonna leave this guy on my counter. I don't like clamp it down because there's a certain amount of air exchange that's needed. So I just kind of like loosely set it on top. And then it's gonna go on my counter. Okay, so our bread has rested for 20 minutes, and now we're going to add the remaining 50 grams of water, and we're going to add 20 grams of salt. So I forgot to mention in the first section, the water that I use is, we have an RO system at our house, so I use RO water, and ours also has a remineralizer on it, so there is some minerals in the water, but you could use bottled water, smart water, whatever you wanted to do. I don't know that I would do tap water, especially if you live in an area where it's chlorinated, because that would inhibit the activity of the sourdough starter, the yeast in the bread. So you just want to make sure that it doesn't have any kind of chlorine or bleach in it. So I'm going to measure out my salt first. So it's 20 grams of salt. I use Celtic sea salt or Himalayan pink salt. I think I tend to do the Celtic salt because you can see the pink little grains in the bread if you use the Himalayan salt. You don't want to use just a table salt or an iodized salt. I would do some sort of sea salt. So we're going to do 20 grams. I measure it separately just in case I put in too much. Then it's not, I have the option to take it out and it's not just in my bread. Come on. Okay. There's that. So now I put my bowl back on. I'm going to tare my scale, and then I sprinkle the salt over the top so you don't have just like one massive ball of salt. And then you're going to do 50 grams of the water, and I kind of spread it over the top because it starts to dissolve the salt crystals. And just go slowly because 50 grams can come fast. Okay. Take it off the scale, and again, you're gonna move it from this bowl into a proving basket or bowl afterwards. So just make sure you have that on hand because your hands will be messy again. And you just get your hands in there and you're just squeezing. It's like a gloopy, gloppy mess. I think it actually feels cool. You can see how it's all just like super gloopy. So you're just going to continue to like massage it, squeeze it through your fingers. You can start to feel the salt dissolve and work in with the dough. And you're just going to keep doing that until it doesn't feel quite so wet. Like you can tell that the water's been absorbed. And then once it gets to that point, we're going to transfer it to our bucket. All right, it's starting to feel like it's coming together. It's not quite so wet anymore. It's getting more sticky as opposed to like slimy. Okay, so now I'm just gonna pick it up and put it in my bowl. And then I'm gonna cover it with a kitchen towel. And then my oven actually has a proof setting, which is what I'm going to use. If you don't have a proof setting on your oven, you just want to put it in the warmest place in your kitchen. It's going to stay in this bowl. We're going to do the bulk fermentation is what we're doing right now. And that's going to last 3 hours. And we're going to turn the dough every 30 minutes during that 3-hour period. So we'll be back for the first turn. Okay, we're back for our first turn. So what you're gonna do is get your hands wet. And then you're gonna reach down to the bottom of the bucket and kind of pull the dough out and flip it over. And you're gonna do that probably, you wanna get all of the dough. So I usually do it 3 or 4 times, going all the way around. Kind of stretch it. And then that's it. And then I always just rinse my hand in the same water. And then I dry it on the towel that goes over the top of the bucket. And it goes back in the oven. So I'll do that again in another 30 minutes. For the first like hour, hour and a half, you can be pretty aggressive with that stretching. And then after that, you're gonna have more air in the dough. And so you want to turn it a little bit more gently, but you'll do that every half hour for 3 hours. All right, so we're down to the third turn here, and you can see, I don't know if you can see, I'm starting to see some bubbles around the outside. On the inside, there's actually starting to be some bubbles on the surface as well. So these turns are still, you don't have to be super careful, but definitely not quite as aggressive. Wet your hand, get to the bottom, kind of do a light little shake, turn. Dough's starting to feel a little bit pillowy. Okay. I just rinse my hand again. And back in the oven on proof. Okay, this is the next part. This has been in the bulk fermentation for 3 hours. You turn it every 30 minutes. And now we're gonna turn it out onto the workbench and cut it in 2. This makes 2 loaves of bread. So we're gonna cut it in 2 and then kind of just like rough shape it into a ball, and then it needs to bench rest for 20 to 30 minutes before you shape it and get it in your basket. So you're going to need You're going to need a bench knife. This is one by OXO. And then you're also going to need, this is when I use my softer dough scraper, but you could just use any dough scraper that you have to get it out of here. So I'm working on a butcher block surface, which is actually fairly non-stick. If you were working on like tile or another surface, you might want to put down a little bit of flour. I normally don't, just because I like to keep as much flour out of the dough as possible, but you may need to, depending on what kind of work surface you're dealing with. So let's get this out of here. You can see the dough, see all the nice air bubbles. It's nice and pillowy. I can see it kind of moving as I move it. So I'm just gonna scrape it away from the sides. Just turn it out. It's a little bit sticky, but it's not bad. this is our dough. Oh, it is actually pretty sticky today. Okay, so I'm gonna cut this in half. If you wanted to, after you turn it out of the bucket, you can dust the surface with some flour, and then as you cut it in half, you can flip it over so that it's on the floured surface, because you're gonna work it on these, shaping them one at a time. But I'm just gonna move mine. All right, so this is one loaf. And the way that I do it is I just kind of keep moving it with my bench knife here. It's gonna stick just a little bit, but that's okay. And I just keep kind of moving around the outside of it. And what you're basically doing is you're getting it into a round shape, and then you're also building tension within the loaf. So you're gonna you want this top surface to kind of stretch and round. So as you're working around the outside of the dough, you're kind of pushing just like this edge, you're gonna push it down and under, which creates like tension on the top, which is what you want. One of the reasons that I don't like to use a lot of flour is that the dough sticking to your work surface just a little bit actually works in your favor, because it almost anchors the ball as you're working it in a circle. The center kind of stays still, so you're able to build that tension on the outside. If you have too much flour, it kind of just slips around too much, and it makes it actually a little bit harder to work with. And you can see, like, it's not quite as sticky to my bench knife as it was. It's not sticking to my fingers as much. So it's a nice, fairly smooth surface, and it's a round shape. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this over here. And then I'm gonna grab the next one. And then I'm just gonna do the same thing. You can see the difference between over here, not really sticking to my bench knife at all, and this is where we started, sticking quite a bit, but I've just found that if you kind of work quickly, the slower that I go, the more it's going to stick. So you're just kind of going fast, and it keeps it from sticking. There is my second ball, my second round. So I'm just gonna put it, not right next to it, but kind of close so that I can cover it with one towel. Even if the centers touch a little bit as it rests on the bench, it's not really gonna hurt anything. So you're gonna cover it with a dish towel, and you're gonna let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes. And then we'll come back and get them ready for the baskets. Okay, so this is my last step for today. I typically, my baking schedule is I will usually, the day that I'm gonna do the steps that we've talked about today, I will normally feed my starter first thing in the morning. So anywhere from 6 to 7, I'll go ahead and feed it. I might leave a little bit extra starter in there to seed it, to get like a faster rise than I normally would. So that's like between 6 and 7, I'll feed it. And then I normally try to start my initial mix by 1 o'clock, because then that means that I can get these guys into the baskets by around 5. I've figured out, for me, the whole process takes about 4 hours. So one of the things you can do at this point is if you wanted to take one of these and put it onto an oiled cookie sheet, you can do a focaccia. So a lot of times what I'll do is the day that I mix, I will go ahead and get one of them formed and in the basket and in the fridge overnight. And then the second one, I'll make focaccia and then we'll have it for dinner. So if I start my process at 1 o'clock, by 5 o'clock, I'm ready to get the focaccia on the pan. I'm ready to get my bread into the basket and into the fridge overnight. So that's the schedule that works for me. So it'll be in the fridge for just overnight. So I'll usually put it in at 5 o'clock, and then I will normally bake the next morning between 6 and 7 is normally what I would do. So it's good to be in the fridge anywhere from 10 to 12 hours. You can do this process in the morning and then bake your bread same day. You would just, instead of putting it in the fridge, you would set it on the counter and it needs to rest for, I think about 4 hours. You just won't it'll be a much milder loaf. You won't have as much flavor. And I always find that I don't get quite as much expansion in the oven when I do it that way. So the bread is a little bit less flavorful and it's a little bit more dense for me. But I've only tried that about once because I like the overnight thing. It has good flavor. So today I'm going to go ahead and do 2 loaves, and then I might do another video on the focaccia portion of it. So I have 2 baskets. They're the baskets with the ridges, and then mine have an it's like a linen cover that goes on the inside, or a liner. So I've got 2 of those, and then for a long time I just used saran wrap and a rubber band around the outside because you have to cover it when you put it in the fridge. But I was going through a lot of saran wrap, and then I found these. I just Googled bread basket covers, and it's like a shower cap, but they came in like a pack of 10. I don't know if I got them on King Arthur or just another one of the baking websites. I can't remember. So that's what I have here. I've got my bench knife. I have some all-purpose flour. I'm just gonna take a little handful. I've already used these several times, and they really do season a little bit. So when you first use them, you really wanna do a lot of flour on the inside. And I would kind of sprinkle it in, and then I rubbed it in so it's really in the cloth. But then as you use them, so after several times, you don't really have to use that much flour because they develop, you don't wash them or anything. They just kind of get this caked up flour on the inside, and that's what keeps the bread from sticking. So I just have like a pinch of flour, and I'll just kind of get that all in the basket. And then this one, same thing, just all on the outside. Okay, I'm setting those aside. Just a piece of flour. I use the bench knife to clean my surface too. All right, I did this one first, so I'm gonna start with this guy. They have kind of joined in the middle, so you just kind of break them apart. And you're gonna take this and you flip it over. And then it's a folding process. So you take the top and you kind of stretch it a little bit away and then fold it down. And then, oh, you're supposed to, okay. And then you go from the sides and you just kind of crisscross like you're buttoning a sweater almost. And then you roll from the bottom and you're gonna roll it over onto itself. And then you're just gonna kinda use that tension of the bench again. And you're kind of like pushing away and then pulling with the other hand just to kind of get the round shape. And then once you've done that, and do that same thing that I did before with the bench knife, just kind of around the sides. And then you're gonna flip it and put it into the basket. And it just gets covered. And then that's what will go in the refrigerator. So, I'm gonna do this other one. Flip it. Pull out from the top. And then do the two sides. It almost looks like a French braid. And then roll it over onto itself, and then you're going to do that push and pull all the way around. You don't want to go too far because the top surface will actually tear. So you want to have enough tension so that when it gets into the oven, it will rise properly, but you don't want too much because you don't want to rip the surface. A little bit from the outside. Okay. And it just gets set in there and covered. And then they're ready to go in the fridge. So I did want to mention one thing about doing the dishes from making bread. The bread dough is very, very sticky and it will cling to whatever it gets on. So I would recommend scraping as much out of the bowls and buckets as you can into the trash. And then I normally use really hot water. You don't want to use like a scrub brush that you like or any kind of sponge that you like to clean it. Because it almost forms like a cement. It'll really get into the bristles and the scrubby parts of the sponge, and it is almost impossible to get out. So make sure your sink is empty before you're doing your dishes from bread making, because those little dough balls, I guess, they'll stick to things like glasses, and if they dry on there, they become almost like concrete. So I normally just use my hands and I will scrape the as much as I can out of the bowls into the trash. And then I'll run really, really hot water and just wash it with my hands. And then once all that dough residue is out of there, then go ahead and use your soap and water like usual. But definitely like a scrubber brush. That's what I was using at the beginning, and it just like caked in there and I had to throw it away. So, anyway, that's it, and I'll see you in the morning when we bake. Okay, so it's the next morning, and I got up this morning and I got out the bread, the two baskets, and I just set it on the counter. And then I'm using a Lodge combo cooker is what I use to bake my bread in. I have two of them. I put them in my oven and I preheated the oven to 500. It's been about 20 minutes. This is like a 20-20-20 process. So you preheat the oven for 20 minutes and then you are gonna bake the bread covered for 20 minutes, and then you're gonna uncover the bread and cook it the remaining 20 minutes. So I have, these are called pit mitts. They're like oven proof, heat proof gloves, which I use because the pan is really hot when you get it out. So I'll just walk you through the process. So the bread goes in the shallow pan. Take the lids off. I have noticed that these seem to stick to the top of the bread a little bit more than just like plastic wrap would. Okay, so you just kind of try to center it and flop it out. Now you do kind of want to move quickly for this because the bread has already started to cook. So I like to do a slash along the back, and then I just do some slashes in the top. Okay, this is a bread lame or lamb. I'm not really sure how you say it, but there's all different kinds that you can get. It's basically a razor blade on a stick. I've seen it done before where you just get these blades and you use like tap a chopstick and do that to score it. So now I'm going to get the top section of the pan and set it on top. These pans are really hot, and you're going to be removing this top section, so I do like to do a little bit of an offset of the handles so that when you go to remove the top, it's just easier to grab. You're not fumbling to separate them. And in they go. You're going to reduce the heat on your oven to 450. And then set your timer for 20 minutes. So I'll see you back in 20 minutes where we'll take the top off. Okay, so the 20-minute timer went off. So I'm going to remove the lids. So hot. Okay, now I'm going to show you what they look like. There's the bread. You can see those. Okay, so we're going to close it up and we're going to give them another 20 minutes. Okay. See you back when they're done.